Well, I am really glad to be in Austin because I get to dress the way I normally dress. um, I'm the oldest son of a Presbyterian minister, so what I learned how to do is clean up and dress, and, like please people. So I wear whatever costume people want. But I grew up in the high Sierras, and as a result of baking in the sun when I was a kid, I've had 4 bouts of skin cancer, so I wear a hat all the time. But this is the only place I can get away with a big black hat, which is one of my favorites, because if I wear it in San Francisco, I'm going to get hit on all the time, which is where I live. The holsters are not for Austin. I actually am AC/DC, iPhone, and fountain pen. So I keep one leg in the pre-technology world that I grew up in, which we couldn't get television in Bishop because the mountains were too high. So guess what we had to do as little kids? We had to make it up every day. What are we going to do? No television, no iPads, no nothing except stuff, twigs. And so I actually knew how to draw early. And being the eldest, my mother just went crazy over every drawing. So I think I got addicted to this, doing a drawing and having everybody go crazy. And then when my 6th grade teacher gave me straight A's for putting drawings on the cover of my sociology reports, I said, hey, this is a way in to getting through school. But I'm colorblind, which I found out when I was 8 years old and couldn't tell the difference between the pink and the green stamps. So art was always something other people would do, and I got interested in physics. So how did this field come about? I want to tell a short story and then go rapidly forward to where I think it's going a little bit. It wasn't a field in the 1970s at all. In fact, facilitation was not a field. Believe it or not, facilitation is what psychologists did with group process coming out of Bethel, Maine, and Tavistock and places like that. But there was a group of people in San Francisco, a company called Interaction Associates, run by 2 architects, who had this idea that everybody could benefit from problem solving like architects do. And so they got a grant from the Carnegie Foundation to do a Tools for Change project to look at how architects work and take those, they call them heuristics, every field develops its jargon, and move it over to teachers. They were really interested in having teachers become problem solvers. And they were next door neighbors to Coro Foundation, which was teaching people leadership through internships and experience. And at that time, there was no experiential education except for the Peace Corps. But there was no literature called experience-based education. There was no community service learning in those days. And so I used to look around for where we could get ideas of how to do this. But Coro was 100% field experiences, 4 days a week, 12 fellows, and they'd come back on Fridays and they would have to make sense out of the city. So one would be at the police department, one would be at a government agency, one would be at the planning department. And the guy who founded Coro did not think that people learned by getting clear. He thought they learned by struggling. I mean, he was a Socratic kind of teacher. So he prevented the staff of Coro from ever lecturing or ever giving answers. We were absolutely prevented from doing that. Well, I'd been a reporter in Chicago, trained as a reporter. I thought it was Vietnam, I had to do something. And I got married and got out of the military because I had a kid. And here I was not knowing what I was doing. Those were pretty crazy years in the 60s. In case any of you from the 60s or 70s? I was really jealous of these interns out there and all their assignments. And so I thought it would be okay to interview them. That wasn't lecturing, that listening to them would be a cool thing to do. And it just turned out, through an accident and a fate of life, did any of you plan to be in this room? I mean, this isn't the kind of thing you plan to do. You kind of stumble into it. I'm looking at Anthony over there. Anthony, by the way, was a Coro trainer. So if you're interested in this Coro thing, you ran, how many did you do? 1 or 2?
I was fellow 1 year and a half.
Yeah. So the accident story, I just want to tell this because those of you who feel like you just stumbled into something and you should have had your life planned, it's really great to say yes to accidents. When I was a freshman in college, the seniors at Occidental College had to compete intellectually with the freshmen and put on events that were supposed to be cooler than the freshman events. And the freshmen were supposed to show their stuff by putting on events and competing with the seniors. The seniors had a secret weapon in that to do the event, you had to announce the event. So you wanted to have a great big poster like your our Austin logo here, something that says, hey, we're having our senior event. Hey, we're having our freshman event. Well, the seniors had on their side Terry Gilliam. Okay, who knows who Terry Gilliam is? Okay, who is Terry Gilliam? He was the animator in Monty Python, and he was the one American. Well, his tigers leaped out of the paper. His babes were stolen to be put up in, this is not before women's movement. He would draw anything Mad Magazine drew. I mean, he was unbelievable. Well, we didn't want to be just left as stupid freshmen. So even though I was colorblind, I can draw I can draw. And so I teamed up with a guy, John Gabriel, and we did our posters. Yes, we're going to fight back. Well, of course, it wasn't anything like Terry Gilliam's, but they were good enough to get me stuck doing posters all the way through college. So here I was, physics major, editor of the paper, doing posters on the backside and doodling in class and had no idea that there was a future in this. So for 10 years, I was a writer, not a drawer, which is one of the reasons these books have been coming out, is I love language and was married to a poet for a long time. So language and graphics have always been like this, together. This is not a visual, it is text graphic, as Bob Horn says. So the minute I started doing this listening thing at Coro, inspired by interactions facilitator recorder modality, poster making and journalism came together. And basically, if you keep your journalistic notes big, like Sophia's doing, you get group graphics, is what we called it in those days. So the first workshop was in 1972 inside Coro. And in 1976, Stanford Research Institute called up and said, our guy Joe Brunin can't be at this meeting. Joe Brunin was a guy who was also an architect, and he had a method called generative graphics. And so he was using architectural type drawing to help people at SRI do future thinking. And so they knew all about this visualization stuff, but they didn't have him available for this meeting, and they had to defend a contract in Sacramento. Well, at the time, a nonprofit doesn't pay very much. In those days, it didn't pay hardly anything. I mean, I'd been working there 8 years, and I was making $20,000 a year. And they offered me something like $600 for one day to just basically record this meeting in Sacramento. I did back of the envelope real fast. I had 2 kids. I started going, whoa, this could maybe make sense. But this meeting really woke me up to the power of this way of working. And bear in mind, this is like maybe the first time I'd ever done it publicly. They came in and SRI described the project, which was a big computer readjust project for the Department of Health in Sacramento. And the problem with the reason they needed to have a special meeting was that they had just changed heads of the agency. And the head of the agency saw this big consulting contract and was grabbing for it as a way to make his name as the new leader. Well, that's a dangerous thing when you're a consultant and your contract gets grabbed by a new manager. And so they explained it, and I started scribing out, and I just did it in a magazine style. List, illustration, list, illustration, list, illustration, marching across very logically what they said. And then we had an interruption in the meeting. The head of the group, or the overarching agency that managed that health agency, walked into the room. And so this new boss, I've never seen somebody move so fast. He jumps up out of his seat. He pulls one of those extension things out of his pocket, a pointer, you know, like it looks like a pen, and you go, and he proceeds to tell his boss what he was doing and reads my chart. Word by word, total confidence, and SRI was locked in because it was their story. I thought, whoa, this is amazing. They were thrilled. They were really, really thrilled with this. So one thing led to another, and I formed my own business in 1977. And I just said, organizational development, communications, and design. And began offering work. And you know what? Nobody wanted group graphics. They didn't know what it was. Nobody was asking for it. Organizations didn't want it. Zero. So I limped along, consulting here, consulting there, and we figured, myself and some other people, Jeff Ball was a person who was very inspiring in the early days. If any of you know Jeff? He and myself and another guy named Fred Lakin kind of cooked up this name, Group Graphics, to describe this. But we figured we needed to have a workshop, and Sandra Florstadt was another one, to let people know what it was. So we did a workshop in 1980 and wrote the first book called I See What You Mean, a workbook guide to group graphics. And basically it was marketing, you know, getting people in through workshopping. And the second one that we ran, which was like a year later, 1981, I had a marketing epiphany. I know you're going to have a session here on how to sell your business. Is Michelle here, Boostone? Is she here yet? No, probably not. There was a strategic planning consultant from Vancouver who came down, David Kaywood was his name, and he said, look, I want to hire you. I want to have you come up to Vancouver and work with my client, and I'm going to set it up so if this meeting bombs, we'll never see you again. But there'll be no problem for me. I'm just going to set it up as an experiment. But if it works, I'm going to be able to differentiate from every other strategy consultant in Vancouver. And I went, oh, maybe my market isn't organizations. Maybe it's strategy consultants who need to differentiate. And oh my God, it was like within 3 months, I had 6 consultants, all of whom had work, who wanted to differentiate. And I was working at General Electric, Apple, Canadian conglomerates, all over the place. My dance card was full for about 7 or 8 years. Then, so we kept running workshops. Then I heard this rumor that the graphic recorders at Interaction Associates were meeting separately by themselves to talk about this field. And I think you were there, weren't you, Lynn?
Yeah. Well, it was just the graphic recorders. It wasn't Interaction.
And Leslie, you were there, right? And how many were at that first meeting?
I think we had 16. We thought we had 8. We could only find 8 anywhere in the world.
And you were all graphic recorders, right?
Actually, even that early, there were people who came who said they had no idea why they came. They just wanted to be there. But so we weren't.
Really?
We weren't practitioners yet.
So you had an open system from the start.
Yeah.
And so what were the big drivers for that first meeting? What?
Well, 4 of us were on a job in Denver, and I just said, wouldn't it be great if we all got together at some point and started talking about our work? And actually, all 4 at the table pushed away from it. For 2 years, they said, why, what, how, what? So that was the only driver was, if there's only a few of us, and we want to extend this, and it works, and we have practices, you know, let's just pull together. So that's really, the driver was just to meet, expand, learn, share. You know, for some people, they were feeling isolated in the work, so that
And I wish to reveal my perception of the seamy underside, because I was one of us, that a lot of what that meeting was about was, this was a group of women, almost all women, who had had guys who were consultants and so on, telling them what to do, where to stand, when to get up and when to sit down. And we wanted to get off by ourselves and just say, let's talk about what we do with no guys in charge.
And you were paid just as much, weren't you?
Right.
This is like how the union movement started. Anyway, you had so much fun, I heard, that you decided to do it again.
No, from the start, we called it the first annual.
You did?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, my God.
Yeah, we had big.
And the second one then had how many people?
I think we had 28.
28. Well, by this time, I was going, what is going on here? Yeah, this is all happening. And I remember, yeah, did I talk to you? I might have talked to you, and I said, why aren't you having any facilitators at this gathering? Oh, that's okay to have facilitators. So I actually invited myself to the third one. So I in no way consider myself the founder of this organization. But I said, wow, this is something to support. This is something. And it was an unbelievable blast. When did we do the Olympics?
Fourth year, I think.
The fourth year we had a graffiti Olympics. Like we did limbo under the paper. We did how many pens can you hold in your hand and work with. We did how fast can you match caps to pens if they're all on the floor. It was how fast can you tape paper on the wall. And what are the different taping techniques? I mean, it was such a hoot. And then we had an epiphanal experience, and I think it was at the same one. Some poor lost soul salesman who'd just gotten fired looked up the week before and decided to come to this thing not having a clue about this field, not having any idea what was going on. And suddenly, and he was one of these people who's kind of like a sausage, you know, he's kind of like stuffed into his body. I mean, he was kind of, you know, I am a salesman. And he got surrounded by this group of people who are used to listening and receiving and listening and receiving. And this guy just melted like butter in a skillet. He was like mush. He was like, couldn't believe it. He was always surrounded by these people. Who is this guy? So interesting. And the last final closing circle, we're up there, and everybody's talking about what they're getting out of this conference. And he started saying he has never had an experience of being accepted like this in his life. He started crying. Everybody was sobbing. I mean, it was like a church revival. It was great. I said, oh, this is great. But then I went, oh my God, this isn't just a profession. This is a practice. This is like Aikido. This is a practice where you get up and do your learning in public. You are going to go to a different place in terms of your awareness of people, your empathy toward people, your humility about what you know and don't know, the relation between language and action, the field of epistemology. I mean, it billows out and out and out. This is a very, very big deal. And we at the Grove kind of fooled around and called it conceptual Aikido. And Tomi Nagai-Rota, who some of you know, named it Shokido, which is whole body calligraphy. So anyway, I love the idea that it's a practice. And I love the fact that you guys said yes to being women, to being receptive, to listening, to empathy, to all those juicy things that women have a lot faster than men do.
And to quote yourself, you said at one point, this is a group that gets together to practice radical acceptance.
Radical acceptance. Radical acceptance. So fast forward to Dan Rome, whom we're going to have the chance to hear at the end of this conference. This is fantastic. Dan Rome is also the reason, those of you who come up and said you like the visual meeting book, you can thank Dan Rome. The reason you can thank Dan Rome is that his book, Back of the Napkin, was selling like hotcakes, along with Presentation Zen and along with Slidology by Nancy Duarte, and an editor at Wiley who'd done a lot of publishing in OD saw this thing spiking. You know, visual business books were starting to sell like crazy, but they were all aimed at individuals. And he calls up on the phone and he says, I understand you do this kind of thing. There's not a literature for groups yet. I think you should write a book about how to do this kind of thing with groups. And Richard Naramore basically sat on my head and had me think through. He had 3 rules for the book. It has to have a good title. It has to have a readable table of contents that tells a story, and it has to have a good first chapter. If you've got those 3 things, the rest of it, you can do what you want. So he came up in dialogue, and we got off of group graphics, graphic facilitation, to visual meetings. And it turns out that putting those 2 words together, if you were doing search engine optimization, people are looking for meeting stuff, and they're fascinated by visuals. And putting the 2 together, I think that's one of the reasons that book just went. So then we did the other one. So thank you, Dan Rome. I thanked him personally for this. If he hadn't done what he did, couldn't have done that. Now, where is it all going? I'm going to end this up here, and I will finish. Can you draw a Venn diagram with 4 circles, one on the top, one on the bottom, side by side, overlapping? Okay. And label the right-hand one graphic design. People have been working this way forever in the design fields. And the graphic design fields, which are behind anything, any kind of media, have been exploding because of the new tools. I mean, all kinds of people can design now with Adobe software and all this kind of stuff. But that's only one of the, so tiny. No, that's all right. You can all see it. The right-hand one's graphic design, and a lot of what we do draws from that field. But down at the bottom is a whole area, another area that uses all of our language called data visualization. And that field is the field of scientific visualization. This is big data land. This is, geo-orbit mapping, information mapping. This is where complexity theorists are looking at looking at complex adaptive systems by looking on computers. Those people go to conferences on visualization, and they don't have they're not designers, they don't even think like that. And they don't even know about us. It's a whole huge world, largely supported by computer graphics and stuff. On the left is ours, visual practice, visual facilitation. And that's working with people interactively with all these visual tools. And so we know how many names there are for that. Those of you who are new, I mean, let's just call out some of the names. What are some of the names for our field? Graphic recording. Graphic facilitation.
Note-taking.
Note-taking. Sketch noting. Scribing. Graphic illustration. Somebody visioneering, did I see that word? There he is. He'll tell you more about that. It goes on and on. There's lots of words for it. But these people are drawing heavily on graphic design, and some are starting to tiptoe into information design, information graphics. So information graphics is sort of where graphic design and visual practice come together with data visualization, because a lot of the people who do data visualization are into infographic representation of data. But so are graphic designers, and so are folks in our field doing story maps and stuff. But I got this idea of these 3 areas from a guy in Australia who was looking to have visualization come into public policy work. I added a 4th one, which is conceptual visualization, which is cognitive visualization. The field of neuropsychology is going crazy looking at how visualization works in the human psyche and the human cognition. And a huge amount of our brain is spent on working with visual imagery. And imagery itself, which is a composite of sound, sight, and feeling, imagery drives behavior. What you imagine drives your decisions. And so what you think IFVP is, what you think this profession is, what your image is going to determine a lot of your choices. So one of the beauties of this conference is to totally mess with our narrow ideas of what this field is. And just as it busted open in the very first one with somebody who didn't know why they were there, And then the third one, the facilitators started showing up. I remember Christina Merkley was there too, at that fourth one or third one. And then the first time are any of you come out of illustration who were illustrators? That's a whole field in the graphic design area that people are saying, people who could really draw. Oh my God, what are they doing here? This is scary. I'm kind of teasing. But I think that your next book, Joel, should be on this field. I mean, radical evolution, man, we are marker cyborgs. You know, and the whole question of how do we make sense out of this, the last project we've been running at the Grove is called Sense Making 2.0. So stay tuned for starting to link up what we know with systems thinking and sense making and other stuff. So that is my quick overview of the conference you are stepping into. How many of you are brand new? All right. India. India. Are you the only one from India? Yes. India doesn't know anything about visuals. Yeah. The chakra's meaningless. It's pretty interesting. Okay. Get me off stage here.
Stage, I'm going to join you, that's all. I want to thank you so much. A handshake.
More.